Dan Perry here with another Dan on Tech Active Directory video for Northeast State Community College.
In the last video, we talked about the types of groups that were available in Active Directory. In this video, we're going to look at how you use those groups. And we're going to start with the domain local. The domain local security group is where Microsoft recommends that you set all of your permissions on the different objects. So set them at the domain level. That would be permissions to access files, folders. That would be permissions to access printers. So you would probably have a lot of domain local groups in a network with permissions on different types of objects. Next, you have global groups. And this is where Microsoft recommends that you put your users. You don't create users in domain local, you create your users in the global groups. The universal groups can have users as members. All of the groups could have other groups as members, but the universal could have users as members. Often we'll have global groups. So universal groups could have users, may have global groups. If I were designing, I would probably get rid of the global groups. Those are really legacy from the old Windows NT, and just have domain local and universal groups, and let the universal groups contain all of my users. Once you have created your users, remember your domain local, I'll say DL groups, that is where your permissions are. A DL or domain local group is where you give permissions on files, folders, printers, etc. You then take, and as members of the domain local group, instead of users, you have either global or universal groups. And those global groups or universal groups will have users as their members. They could have even other groups. So every user that is in a global group, when it is placed in, that global group is placed in the domain local group, that user inherits all of the permissions of the domain local group. So if a domain local group was given permission to print to a HP printer, all the users in that global group now can print to that HP printer. This way, you only have to give permissions one time to that printer, then add your global groups as membership to that domain local group, and all of the users now have permission for that printer. Rarely, if ever, do you or should you set permissions or place a user in a domain local group. Those would be special cases. If you think about who uses shared printers, who uses shared directories, who needs access to particular files, it's generally people that are in the same job function. Those would be people in the same group. So you may have a group called accounting, and everybody in the accounting group needs access to a particular printer in the accounting department. They may need access to particular files and folders on the network. So you put the members there, then you make them a member of the domain local group that has that permission. You might have an engineering group. That engineering group would have access to engineering folders. And pretty much, again, everyone in that department needs access to that engineering folder. So you put them in the engineering group, then place them in the domain local group that has those permissions, and then they inherit all those permissions. A lot of times people in multiple departments may need access to the same thing. So for example, we've got a domain local group that has access to engineering drawings. Maybe everybody in the engineering group needs access. You might need the people in manufacturing to also need access. So you create the permissions one time in that domain local group, add both the engineering and manufacturing groups to that domain local engineering drawing group. They all then have access to those groups.
Thank you for watching this Dan on Tech video for Northeast State Community College. Please subscribe to this playlist so you don't miss future videos.